Hi, I'm Evelyn.
I'm Alexis.
I'm Katie.
And I'm Anna.
We are the Marmalade Mermaids. This week, our flag means vision. Season 2, Episode 3, The Innkeeper.
Katie says that I've kind of been on a vision quest the last few years and learning about vision and seeing and lots of things. So it was a big idea that's definitely been a key thing in my life recently. So to have one story, I wanted it to be kind of succinct and incorporate some things. So I thought of one. Years ago, Katie and I went to go to see the Kingdom Choir. And the Kingdom Choir is the performers that sang Stand By Me at Harry and Meghan's wedding. You might remember that. They were wonderful. And we got to go see them live. And it was at a park. It was in Las Vegas. It was a really small venue. And I felt like this was a hidden gem because if people really knew how good they were, like this was an incredible situation. Anyway, so we got to sit in the grass and see them and hear them. And watching the choir, Karen Gibson is the choir director, and she is a marvelous lady. Yeah, beautiful on the inside and out, and just all the things. And she leads the choir with such love and such grace. You could see her love for each individual, and each person in the choir got time to shine. And you could tell that she just knew their talents and knew them as people and loved them as people. And it was remarkable because at the end, they kind of came down and saw us all because it was such a small place and such a small group. And here we are at a park. And so we got to go and talk to them. And yeah, we found out they are very much like a family. And some of them she's very close with, like daughters and sons. And she thought it was remarkable that we could see that just being in the audience and be able to see that relationship. And she kind of framed it as a spiritual gift. And so when I bought the CD and she signed it, she said, "Keep seeing." And so I love this idea of vision and sight and being, and it kind of harkens back to our episode of being seen, but it's the other side of it. It's doing the work to do the seeing. And there are lots of things that can keep us from seeing. I really recommend Brian McLaren's podcast, Learning How to See. The first season goes into a lot of the biases that are inherent in people, not for any bad reason, just because we're people, that keep us from really truly seeing. And seeing is really important. That's how we see what is true. And vision could be like that spiritual gift, like having a vision, being able to be taught and glimpsing a new way of life, being able to envision a new way of life. And I was also thinking, like I think of Anna as a good habit of seeing things as already granted and living as if they are already real and granted and it's all right now. And I feel like that's a spiritual, like seeing vision gift. And that's my story.
Thank you, Alexis. I have our 1-minute recap of the episode. So I'm going to tell it right now, best I can. The red flag pirates are just rock stars. Jen is making alliances with pirate captains that she overtakes. And the red flag eventually meets up with the Revenge. The Revenge is looking rough. And the Blackbeard Revenge crew tells Steed that Ed is retired. But Auntie smells mutiny and she investigates. And in her investigation, she has a vision of the mutiny. The Revenge crew gets locked up because they were mutinous. And Auntie finds Ed, maybe he's dead, like he has a cloth over his face. And Steed makes a unilateral decision that they are all going to escape. So Jim and Archie and all the crew have to get out. I put the boys, sorry, but Jim and Archie are not the boys. And it turns out that Archie is really good at archery. And then meanwhile, Ed is on the beach and he's in the gravy boat and he meets Hornigold, and Hornigold is just a projection of himself. And Hornigold throws Ed over the edge of a cliff.
That was like a minute and
Ugh,
5
I was
seconds.
better, but I have a hard time with saying Jen.
Zheng.
Jen.
Jen. That was our episode. So, in this episode of Vision, Evelyn, can you kick us off? Where did you see some vision?
I don't want to go with the most obvious one right off the bat. And I kind of like that you, Katie, during your recap kind of mentioned the other one that I was like, this is the only other one that I could think of. Is just Auntie seeing the visions of Blackbeard, the mutiny that was occurring and everything. Which is it's interesting because it's very much like it just seems really like detective reasoning and everything behind it. Like seeing the like the everything that's on the ship and seeing how Fang's kind of reacting and stuff. She's able to put these into like pieces together and see the vision of like what's going on, what happened with Blackbeard, and was able to figure out like I don't know how she was well, besides, basically using all that and Fang's like guiltiness and Frenchie just being like showcase like showing where he is. But she's also seems always kind of like, the spiritual person as well. So maybe she did actually see some visions of like what's happening, but um I think that was one showcasing of vision besides the other one, which is of course Blackbeard being in that limbo of like life or death, I would say, um, and having Hornigold as some sort of version of himself. And then towards the end there, seeing the vision of Steed as a merman.
I love
Right.
that you brought up Auntie because we were just talking about that, Alexis and I. Like,
Mhm.
it's this weird confluence of like all the skills and artists that a con person has and like being able to read somebody, right? Or like a spiritualist, not that spiritualists are con people, whatever you believe and think. And
Mhm.
then like a prophetic, like religious, spiritual, like actual vision. And then also like a detective ability that she's Poirot or Miss Marple or somebody putting all of these pieces together. It's pretty like amazing her vision because it happens with the Sea Witch in the previous episode. It happens
Yeah.
in this one. It's cool. Anybody else that seen vision?
I just in a small way, the opening scene where we see Jane go into the captain's quarters with John, and that defeated captain is at first unable to see Zhang as anything. She's not the captain,
Mhm.
right? And our vision, our perspective is often challenged. We can't see what we're not aware of. And so it is like, oh, no, it's not him. Oh, nope, it's not him. Okay, well, we are forced to see the truth.
I think that
Mhm.
that situation comes up quite a few times in this episode where it's like these my perception of reality butts up against reality or like my perception of the future butts up against what's happening in real time. And I think that John Bartholomew is a good example of that, but also like the crew of the Revenge, of Blackbeard's Revenge at the end, like they've kind of got this perception and vision that their life is over and like there's no escape attempts. There's no like, oh, well, tomorrow. They're like, yeah, we're going to die. And we're just been living moment to moment. And then that kind of like finality butts up against Steed's vision of what like he unilaterally just decides like we're gonna escape. We're all leaving. And like they didn't see that for themselves. So it's yeah, I really like the way you said it, Alexis, because it's this idea of what I perceive is happening and what I perceive as the future coming up against somebody else's perception and then like the way that we interact as a community and changing what the other people see.
Real paradigm shifts too. Like what I thought was reality, suddenly there's something else possible.
I think that's one thing I can really appreciate about Steed. He's always has like this um positive, like very open perspective on things, which I think is a good like at least having like being open, or like seeing like what other options there can be usually, or something like that, and have more of like a positive vision on things. But I think that's a good quality as a captain to have a good well, then again, I don't know what the pirate world, it's difficult to say what's really like a good or bad captain.
I see both Ed and Steed in this episode facing things that they have to face and learning to see it in a new way. And I
Mhm.
think Steed, we've seen over and over that someone else has to help him. Someone else has to help him see things in a different way. And then you're like, oh, right, okay. And in this episode, we see it with Izzy. He's like, actually, here's the situation. Here's what Ed was doing, and why he was like this. And we actually now have to protect the crew. And well, why do we have to protect? Oh, because he wasn't even seeing this other part of potential danger. And then Ed is in the gravy basket having his like, I have to learn to see what I need to see moments.
Isn't that beautiful when Izzy's like, you and I owe it to this crew. Like we are going to protect them. I love that. That Izzy is like kind of is that kid who didn't want to get hugged and he's just like, don't hug me, don't touch me, don't let me be a part of things. To the point where he's like, it wasn't that he was ever disloyal to the crew, but that he has like such an alliance to the crew. I just thought was beautiful. Before we get on to Ed, because like he's definitely somebody we have to talk about his vision. I think in this episode and his imagination and like how our brains work out what's going on. Um, I wanted to say that I think romance is really weird and it comes up in this episode a lot about how it changes our vision. And I think the first time we see that is when Archie's like, "Oh man, you're Steed?" Like when you hear of somebody else who's in love with somebody, that person sounds like the most magnificent, amazing, beautiful person on the planet. And then sometimes when you come up to reality of that person, you're like, "Oh, you're not what I thought you were gonna look like." And then sometimes they do turn out to be like the most beautiful person you've ever seen. You're like, "Oh, whoa, you took my breath away for just a minute." Um, so I think that that's really interesting, and I think that situation with Archie brings up how romance, like, changes your vision and what you're able to see and your attention, and then with Zheng and Olawande, like, they've got so much serotonin kind of being pumped through their system that they literally can't see everything that well. Like their brains are changed in what they're able to see. And I just think that that can happen in a lot of relationships, right? But romantic relationships are really interesting in the way they change your ability to see things, your vision.
They say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and a lot of it, like, been evidenced that people become more beautiful with love. I did write down before we, dive into the gravy boat basket. I said boat. That Auntie, what she was able to identify that they were escaping because she was on patrol. Like she is putting in action. She is actively patrolling. She's keeping her eyes open and seeing things where others might be distracted. And wherever our attention is, we're going to be blind to the stuff that's not in our attention. One of the episodes of Brian McLaren talks about the video. It's kind of famous. It's like, okay, you're going to watch the people with shirts on, and they're going to toss the ball, and you're going to count how many times. And it's this exercise, and people at the end, they're like, oh, I counted this many times, this many times. I'm like, okay, well, how many people saw like the gorilla walking across the
He
screen? And
did
everyone's
that?
like, he's like, what gorilla? No one sees the gorilla because everyone's so focused on the task that our attention also blinds us from other things. So I think that's reminds me of the love thing too. It's like I'm so invested, I'm so focused on this that I become blind to other things.
Connecting to Alexis's thought of the things you can't see. I think that's what I was kind of focusing on. And that I looked at the word vision And it kind of what stood out to me was that it's seeing, it's being able to see, but it's also like what you're seeing. And so what stood out to me was the Greek word, which is orama, and that means wide view. So being able to perceive a lot of things and what it is that you're actually seeing, I think is really interesting. And then when I was looking into that, not just thinking about sight and viewing through your eyes, but thinking more as a spiritual or a mental understanding of all of these pieces being put together. And again, having that breadth of knowledge and understanding of like, oh, okay, this is starting to make sense to me. Like things are just starting to come into focus. And then as I was looking at the Greek, I found something that referenced that the Maori word for vision is also orama, which is really interesting.
Oh,
And I was like,
wow.
oh, that's really cool. And the way that they use the word is vision connected to dreams, which again, I'm like, oh, that's just really, really beautiful. And so that's where I kind of started, and then trying to find examples of it. What stood out to me was the very beginning when Zhang's talking to the skull crusher, or whatever his name is, John, where she has this vision of pirates working together. And I love the way she kind of presents it. She's like, well, I don't know. Like, what about? Oh, no, I'm not going to tell you. Like, it's kind of silly. And so it's really subtle and small, but what she's doing is very revolutionary in all of these different ways. She conquered China, and now she's coming over here to the Caribbean, and then they're bringing the boats over the land. Like, again, these things that you wouldn't necessarily think is possible, she's doing. And she has this understanding of what if we looked at it a different way, and what if we tried something new. And so I think, again, it's this really small reference that you get the thread of, and it never really, because of things that happen later, it never really gets picked back up again. But yeah, that she has this idea that we're going to work together against the English and the Dutch and all this kind of stuff, because it's hard being a pirate. Similar to Auntie and her vision that is before this of Buttons, of kind of having this understanding of, I know exactly who you are, I know exactly what you need. And Buttons is like, yeah, that could be, sure, yeah, I'll go with that. And then leading into the understanding of what happened with Ed, because she can just kind of read the crew, and then being able to read the ship, and that they're amazed by that. Frenchie and Fang are, how are you doing this? Where she's not just saying someone got hurt here, she's like, oh, a man, he was right here. Again, it's almost like she can see it. It's this perception of hers that is just really, really cool. And so those are the things, in addition to Ed, which I know we're going to get to, but that's what I thought of. And that's tying back to that idea of Steed and Ed in general, of not being able to see things. I think that's just humans, that you have someone, it's part of your unconscious, it's part of your shadow. And that's kind of where I went with this, of thinking about the Jungian shadow. But there's a reason you can't see it. Like, it's on your six. And so you need someone else to help you. And I don't think that means that you're blind to it, that you're not, attentive, that you don't care, that it's not important to you. I think that there are things we actually are not aware of, and then all of a sudden it can come, and it's almost like it's fully formed. It feels that way because it was always there. Again, we just couldn't see it. So those are all my thoughts right now.
That's wonderful.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
And I think that when you said that, like the wide view, I love that relates back to the Maori, and did you say the Greek?
It's Greek, yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
But this wide view, I think that's what Auntie's able to do. And that's why she said, like, we have not, like, I have been waiting for you for my whole life. She's like, we've been waiting for a long time. Like, I don't remember what she says, centuries or something, for you to come back to us, Sea Witch. And that Buttons is able to receive that, but it is the wide view. And I think Zhang, she has this really sick ability to like have a vision of how to make a better future, but then work, because if this wasn't vision, it could be patriarchy. She knows how to work the patriarchy to make that vision effective, right? She doesn't just say like, I'm going to make this happen and I'm going to really try to work for hard to make a team. She knows that she's able to say things to these men in a way that it's their idea, right? That it's palatable. And I see her do that in many, many ways throughout our entire interaction with her. She's just able to read someone else and understand how to connect with them in a way that I think is what they need to hear. So that's a very wide view. It's a very like not looking at the self, but looking at what somebody else might need in order to be seen. I love that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think a lot of characters do that. They're able to have this perception of another person and then be like, "Oh, this is what you need." And I don't know that they're always aware of it. Sometimes they are, and I think it's cool when they are like very deliberate and intentional. But I think sometimes again, yeah, they're just having they get this sense of what's happening behind the scenes for the other person. And then it's like, this is kind of I think this would help. Yeah, I think that's great.
I hadn't thought of it, but the moment with Jim and Alawande and just like upfront, blunt honesty, like that reminded me of it. It's a little bit being seen, and it's a little bit like, I'm just gonna lay out all the cards.
Yeah, which I think is so interesting because then when Jane kind of stumbles is when she's trying to seduce Olawande. And at
Mm-hmm.
first, if you're just taking her actions and her words, I mean, his reaction is understandable because it's like, what's about to happen here? And then she's like, oh, I'm sorry, was that not clear? And so I think, yeah, we can all have this wide vision, but then when the stakes are higher for us personally, it's just hard. It's just harder in a different way. But then she really gets to that direct honesty of like, no, I like you, like let's make out, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's again like we're not all one thing. We have moments of it, and then we have moments where we lose it and we, get it back. But again, trying to reach that I think first honesty with ourselves before we can then kind of share that honesty with others.
Something I didn't really think of before, but our conversation is bringing it to mind is that idea, what you just said, Anna, like of touching the divine. And like anciently, people believed, I just know this from Elizabeth Gilbert's TED Talk. Was her name Elizabeth Gilbert? Where the muses come and visit you, right? And it's this like maybe that's part of what your vision is and your ability to see others is this like touch of the divine or touch of a muse so that you're able to have kind of a perspective bigger than yourself. But I think that that's so true that when like there's romance involved or a lot of stress or a myriad of other reasons, right? Our ability to see and envision things can get really narrowed and skewed.
Yeah, for sure. That definitely happens.
I love when on the red flag though, when they see the revenge, how they're all trying to piece together like this is the ship we left and this is how the ship looks now, like what happened. And I love, love, love when Wee John's like, maybe she went through that triangle thing near Bermuda.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that as an example. I think that's a great example of just seeing this ship and being like, well, it must have been something really bad that happened. So
It's a lot of
maybe, yeah, Bermuda
yeah, it's a
Triangle.
lot of the stories that we tell ourselves, and we're
Yeah.
trying to fill in the holes to make it make sense to us.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
All right, you want to talk about Ed's vision?
I know I remember going into the episode for the first time watching it. I really thought they did abandon him on the beach and everything. This was all like it was really interesting to see that. Um and then rewatching it again and like visually seeing it, it's like all gray. It's not like the most, so it all makes sense. Like the color scheme of it was like it's so different from what we always see, which is a more warm, vibrant color from like all the other scenes. And then this one is such a gray. So it makes sense now, like rewatching it again, which I thought was really cool that they did with it because it's like once you I don't know. I thought like this is a weird just actually seeing like what we saw like after understanding what's going on. It's it's like, oh, okay, that's why everything is so dark and gloomy and gray because it's not actually like this is all in his mind and everything. And like he's actually in this like cloudy limbo of like whether or not in living. I just wanted to comment that like that was kind of cool to like notice that after having seen the episode entirety and then rewatching it again. It's like, now that's why it's all gray.
Yeah,
Now
it's a
it just
very Twilight, liminal,
yeah.
not day, not night.
But um I really I found that segment very interesting. There was a lot of stuff happening there. Different thing like basically it's we see Captain Hornigold and he's saving Ed along with his like little pig, and it's in this like abandoned island and everything, and there's like so many just seems like all's going well, and then just the immediate transition, that like just immediate transition of like this isn't real, and all that, like I know everything that's going on with you and I can't die. Like the horny gold is just that immediate like switch, and it's like, oh, okay. But and I think that very much epitomizes like how Ed is kind of like the intent, like just the two different drastic changes in him, where it's like he is both like he can be this like really just, I don't know, like enjoyable person, and then it's like, but he has a lot of like inner turmoil that he still needs to really work through. It's interesting that Hornigold is like the weird vision of himself, and I think it's like, and it's not really like his dad, but they chose to go with like Captain Hornigold.
Yeah.
Father figure.
Yeah.
I wrote that down too. It's like, well, why of all the people in his story, why is this the personification?
And that one, like that was the interesting part, because it's like I I guess maybe yeah, like Katie said, like it was like his father, like it's a father figure to him, and and the like weird personification that's like he is like Ed, and so it's just all like, I don't know, I was just really intrigued that he, this is a personification of himself, like this is him and everything, so he's like, so I guess he's seeing himself as he's become Hornigold.
Yeah, or everything that Hornigold is doing is really a reflection, and it's things
Mm-hmm.
that either Ed has done or will considers or has considered okay.
And it's both like, I don't know, it is such a like that whole like journey through that vision is like very interesting, because it's very much like both anger, and then there's a lot of like anger and then like enjoyment and sadness, like all these different emotions like traversing like that entire thing, and then the end where he sees like Steed. But like I really liked that just interesting journey of like figuring out like what is wrong with him, what's going on with him, and coming like to like what does he want, how does he actually feel about himself.
I had another thought when you were starting off talking about, like, there's a moment where all of us realize, oh, this is a vision, this is not real. And I
Mhm.
think that's kind of like we see with the characters. Like, we're telling ourselves this story, we're going along, we're following along, he's lost on this beach, whatever. And then like a paradigm shift happens and we have to like, oh, reset, recalibrate what's really going on here. I think all the things that he sees in Hornigold is all the stuff that he doesn't like in himself. It's like we've
Mhm.
been talking about Ed and Blackbeard with kind of two different names in
Yeah.
the other episodes, where he's acting as Ed or he's acting as Blackbeard. And before his kind of crash, he was really embracing all of the Ed, right? And so I think the things that he's seeing in Hornigold are things that he genuinely doesn't like in his Blackbeard self.
And I'll say for Hornigold, like I have a lot of thoughts about that projection of himself and things to say, but in our talking about it right now, I'm finally able to see like there's a lot of compassion that Hornigold does have, or that shadow version of Ed has for himself, where he said like he's trying to give him nutrients at the beginning. Um, Bless his heart, he has like rigging of a like mast of a ship and stuff, and he is still Mr. Fashion as much as you can with like ropes and canvas yuck and grommets. Like you're doing something, dude. And then I really like the part where they talk about the crew member Felix, and Hornigold's like, you can't dwell on it. Like, but you have to decide. Like, that's what I did. Am I going to move on, or am I just going to like give in to despair and give up on life or whatever? I don't know what he doesn't really make it
Mhm.
clear, but he's just like, you got to move on, man. And he's trying to prod Ed towards that. And he's like, or we could just have a soup. And Ed's like, soup. He's like, yeah, let's just go have soup. And so I think there is some compassion that this shadow version of Ed has in working with himself, of even the idea of tricking him, like, let's go up to the thinking spot. I think that that's some compassion. But one of the things where I don't see a lot of compassion, it's like some kind of there's a lot of things, but one of the things that I keep thinking about that's a little bit of a harshness is that all of us, Anna and Evelyn and I, have all been scooped up into Alexis's family. They're a family that loves to play. And like Alexis's mom is a beautiful person. And she like really believes if you're bored, it's your own fault. Like you can always shift the way you're thinking about something. You can always, have a new way of interacting with your space, even in just your mind. And I think that's really beautiful. And I love that Ed's like light side of himself is like, I want to be an innkeeper. Like, I'm a simple person. Let's play this game. And this shadow version of himself as Ben or Hornigold is like not wanting to play the game. And I didn't realize until I see it there, like how important it is to just play along and to just like give it a go and have kind of a good attitude about it and do that playful way that Steed and Ed do so well together. You can see it like this critical part of Ben. He's like, I'm not having it. Like, you're not good with people. You need to be prepared for this. You're two rose colored glasses and like just not having fun.
I like that. Like that scene in particular, was is basically kind of showcases like pretty much how Ed still holds on to like those negative parts of himself. Like it was a good encapsulation of like how I think pretty much how Ed handles a lot of things where it's just all like it seems like he does like be he's trying to be this like better person or positive thing, but there's always something in him that like holds him back, and Ben is like showcasing that, like, just the immediate like change of like, hey, remember, like, you have this one thing that's like always going to put you back into like super negative, which is strangling your dad and everything, because that is always one of like the one thing that really is interesting that always holds him back, like puts him back into this, like, you're not a good person. And it all stemmed from that, right? Like it all like that just childhood like trauma of like, I did something really, really bad. And so I'll never be a good person. Even though like all the things that he like he came to doing that. Like he had to do that. I've been watching this show. So Ben and I have been watching this show also called Invincible. It's a very I don't know if you guys heard of it, but it's like it's not an easy watch, and I totally get it. It one of the things is that it's unfortunately a very gory show. It's sometimes I'm like, oh geez. But there it's basically you have these superheroes, and they're very like, and they do like that show does such a good job in humanizing these like superheroes, especially the main character Invincible. And I'm kind of seeing like similarities there, where like, to give you a gist of the show, basically his dad, Invincible's dad, seemed like to be this amazing superhero, and he's done so much good, but there was such a sudden change, and it's a big realization that his hero, this man that he thought like he saw was his hero, is not good at all. And so Invincible for the longest time has always been wanting to be like his dad, because he wants to be a good person, he wants to be a superhero. And now in the like recent episode, he is like traversing this like, I'm not my dad, I don't want to be him, like, and everything, but he does things that are like similar, and he's having such a hard time like saying like he's having such a hard time saying like figuring out like, am I my dad or am I not? And he's just like, he has put himself like, and I think that's kind of what Ed, like, that's why, like, I think Ed is like thinking too much of like, I am Hornigold, like, I am Ben. I've become this like really bad person and everything. So I'm having such a hard time taking myself out of that. just hit my brain of like those two characters are so similar, especially like right now in the recent, it was really sad. And Ed having this a hard time just trying to figure out who he is. It like it all makes sense because it's like for the longest time he may have been like really not a bad person at all, but that like one like thing that happened in his childhood, it's like it's really transformed him into this like I'm just not good. I don't like myself because of like everything that I've done, and it's just it continues to add on to that.
Well, and there wasn't like what you said, there's not this self-loathing that Ed has for killing his dad because his dad wasn't a good like he could have been very violent, he could have killed his mom. Like unchecked, his who knows what his dad would have done, right?
Hmm.
So Ed like admits that freely, like my dad was not a good guy. But I think that that makes a lot of sense that Ed's a little bit like, am I just like my dad? Am I as ruthless as Hornigold was as a captain? Am I like, I've done really terrible things. Does that make me a terrible person?
Yeah, like I think Ed, one of the things is that Ed's really having a like has been having a hard time figuring out who he is as a person.
This is not the same, but it reminds me of in The Empire Strikes Back when Luke has to walk into the cave and face the thing that whatever the thing is, and it turns out like his reflection is Darth Vader. It's like accepting that thing in yourself. That would be the hardest thing for you to see in yourself.
Yeah, that's funny. I thought of the same thing. Um, for me, I was trying to find understanding for Hornigold. That he's yes, okay, he's gross and mean and whatever, but like there's a reason this conversation is happening. There's a reason Ed has this person is coming up in this form for Ed. And I think again for me, I kind of went to archetypes and I went to Jungian and I went to dreams and I went to shadows and the shadow self, thinking about this confrontation. If you're looking at this confrontation with Hornigold as yes, it could be the dad, it could be all these different things, but like this is again that shadow part of Ed, and it's not to demonize the shadow. The shadow isn't doing anything wrong. The shadow isn't trying to hurt you. The shadow isn't trying to get you. The shadow is actually trying to protect you. And the shadow is actually looking out for you. And it's coming up because you need to face it and you need to integrate it. You can't just keep running and hiding from it. And I think that's how I looked at a lot of the interactions was Hornigold trying to get Ed to kind of move. Like you can't just stay stuck here. You actually need to move. And so I'm sorry, my thoughts are all over the place, but just looking at that part to start with, of the idea of okay, they're going to do this thing where he's the innkeeper and Hornigold isn't playing along. Yes, I absolutely agree. Hornigold isn't playing along. And one of the reasons that could be is I was looking at what Hornigold was saying. Like you're going to have to deal with customers like this. Like you can't just sort of avoid and distract, which is what Ed likes to do. He
Mhm.
likes to avoid and he likes to distract. And Hornigold pushing him in those moments, I don't know if it's this act of aggression as much as it is an act of we've done enough running from this thing. We've done enough avoiding of this thing. And now we just have to say the thing out loud. Like this is about your dad. And when you're doing shadow work, it's not fun and it takes a long time and it's not cute. But ultimately, trying to ignore the shadow, trying to fight the shadow, trying to outrun the shadow, trying to distract, like none of that works because you have to actually look at what that shadow is trying to teach you, because ultimately is trying to teach you something. And this isn't to kind of brush lightly over the part of this where there is a conversation of do I want to live or die. Like you can absolutely map suicidal ideation and depression. I don't want to like just belittle all those things. I'm just saying that the piece that I'm looking at is this part, which again I think could also be true. I think it can be multiple things at the same time. And so that's what I was looking at, and that kind of led me to this consideration of the word gravy basket and then Ed offering out the word purgatory. And then I'm like, well, what does purgatory mean? Let me make sure I understand what it means. And I always thought it was punishment. And that's the later understanding of it. But initially, it was about cleansing and purifying. Like that purgatory is supposed to be about purifying. and it's supposed to be about cleaning those parts that hurt and those hurts that you have. And again, I think that that could be an argument for what Hornigold is doing here, especially when you get to the end with the cliff. But again, that may not work for everyone, but that was something that really struck me as helping me understand one of the things that's possibly going on in this collection of scenes.
I think
I
that's
really
really well
like that.
said, Anna.
Do you think that like this I really enjoyed that, Anna. That like I feel for me personally, I think that like really well done encapsulate like what was going on there. Like
Oh,
what
thanks.
exactly was like Ben's Hornigold's position in this whole entire like that whole entirety. But do we think like did like that Hornigold vision, do we think that like he knew that by just throwing the rock in and forcing Ed, you know, to jump off the cliff and everything, did he know that like you're going to see this vision of Steed? Or it's just like, you know, like I don't know, because it's kind of an interesting thing because it's like going off of that's like, do you like it's very much like, you know, you need to face this, you need to see these things, like you need to see and understand like your feelings and how you feel about yourself and all that stuff. And once again, we're just standing here, you're not taking any action, you're not doing anything, we're just you got to do something. And so like here you go, I'm gonna push you and you're gonna go in and you're gonna think this is like, well, it's like this is like forcing him into an action of like you're gonna finally see like what is what's helping you through this limbo, and it's Steed.
Yeah, I didn't think that until I watched it this last time, trying to like again put all the pieces together. But that was something that I don't know that it's perfectly formed, but I feel like there
Yeah.
might be something there. Yeah, they're having the conversation of, you know, well, what do you want? Do you want to live or die? And Ed's like, well, I guess I think I choose live. And then he's like, okay, warmth, soup, orgasms, like those are the things I want to live for. And Hornigold's like, great, let's go to my thinking spot. Like that conversation directly leads to this next action with the rock and the rope, which again I couldn't really put together. But I think what you're saying, Evelyn, is what I thought of. Like I think Hornigold knew that again, like you have to go into this, you have to go into the ocean, like you have to go here before you're going to be able to actually see that thing
Yeah.
that you want to live for. And the reason I kind of bring that up is because I think that just connects, I think that connects with this idea of death and rebirth, which comes up again and again in the show when it happens with Steed faking his own death, and then the song at the beginning with the, you know, with the Edelweiss, where again like this ending is the transformation into the new beginning. And that's why I think like it was intentional, and I think it was an act that wasn't meant to hurt Ed. I think it was an act of like, you're not going to actually be able to see this until you get into this place where everything else falls away except for the light and the little beautiful Steed merman. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, because even during that conversation, he was all like, "Yeah, I think I want to live." And there's all these pros in it. And then he immediately goes into like, "But nobody's waiting for me." And it's just like super negative again. It's not like once again, like you're still in between. Like, I think we really need to like it's this or that, because you're just gonna be stuck in the like, even if you like live or die and stuff, you're just always gonna be stuck in this like limbo. And it's
Yes.
just like you need like unfortunately sometimes you need to like really choose whether you want to stick with these like negative qualities about yourself and stuff and really not get to a point that we know that you want to, but you keep holding yourself back.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I think ultimately, like I'm framing in the terms of shadow work instead of like life or death, because again, that can be tricky, and I don't know how people are going
Yeah.
to hear that. But I absolutely agree. I think everything you just said is spot on, especially that really great point of Ed says, "There's no one waiting for me," and then immediately Hornigold's like, "Okay, yeah, let's go to my thinking spot." With and the rope and the rock are already there. So again, I think you're right. I think he's trying to get them to the action of like, you need to see these things about yourself. And again, I think that's more of the metaphor of living. Like you need to understand who you are. You need to understand that people care about you. But
Yeah.
first you have to confront this fear that you're not lovable, and you have to say it out loud. And then we can kind of get to that next point of, but what if there's someone who does love you? And then you have an example and an experience where they're telling you that they love you and they care about you. And that mostly the thing with Steve is like, he's saying you're safe, like you're safe with me, which I think
Yeah.
is just, exactly what Ed needs to hear. And I think, again, if Hornigold is Ed, then Hornigold knows that that's part of it. That's what he needs to hear as
Mhm.
well.
I love that they have to go, like, the thinking spot is high up on the highest cliff because it reminds me of the vision, right? You have to have the long view. You have to look really, see from a great distance. And then I was thinking of um, that we see over and over that Ed's MO is to like push people till they fall, right? He pushes Lucius out, he pushes off the little statue things. And
Ah,
so he is
Mhm.
literally pushed off and
Oh,
it's
yeah.
falling. Like the action is falling. And
yeah.
recently I heard a quote about meditation or something related to that. Like the bad news is we're all falling. The good news is there's no ground, right? So like
Mm.
just kind of getting comfortable in the falling and that unease and all the discomfort of it. I have it, and I was wondering, my question was, if Steed didn't go down and take the cover off his face, like would he just keep falling until some point? Um,
Mm.
and sometimes in dreams, falling makes you wake up. Like
Yeah.
that is an action that sometimes happens too. So those are some thoughts I had.
I think one of the reasons why I like the gravy basket is because I've done this work, the shadow work that Anna talks about, and it is intimidating and it takes years and a lot of trust. And I'm not a person who thinks like, oh, I am not self-reflective. I don't really care about this. I came into this feeling like, yeah, I know myself pretty well. And I think one of the things about uh, interacting with younger versions of myself, interacting with, I call her my mean manager. She takes care of business. Um, interacting with these different parts of myself is that I really trust them. There might be people I'm a little bit intimidated by or a lot intimidated by. One of them like has the cold air that like precedes her. She will freeze you out literally and figuratively. And even with that, there's never been one of them that I haven't trusted. But I'm used to having very frank conversations with myself and with the people who are very close to me. And I don't think, in what we've seen of the character of Ed, that he has had that. So it was hard for me to see Ben as a reflection of himself because I felt like Ben was trying to trick him. Ben was not being like, these meaner versions of myself, right? They're not compassionate towards me or kind, but I do know, like what Anna said, they're trying to protect me, and their ultimate goal is to teach me something and to help me. And like as I have accepted that, embraced that, then I don't need those parts of myself anymore. I am that person. I don't need somebody. I don't need a mean manager to come in and take care of things. I can take care of them. Um, but Ed hasn't really done that work. So I really appreciate this conversation because it's really pointing out how Ben is protecting Ed, how Ben is being compassionate and loving towards Ed in the way that Ed is ready because he hasn't done some preliminary steps in order to have conversations with Hornigold and to see himself in the way that he needs to be seen or embrace that thing. I love Alexis and I talked about it because it's something that really bothered me because it's just not what I think about love. But when they're on top of the cliff and Ed says, I'm not lovable, and he said, and Ben says, and you're scared to do anything about it. And that hurts me because I'm like, people don't love you because you have to do something in order to be loved. But Ed didn't know that. And Hornigold has to push him off the cliff so that Ed can embrace that, like that he is enough, that he is worthy, and he doesn't have to do anything to be loved or lovable. He is. And Hornigold says, you're welcome. Like, I really liked that Alexis pointed that out to me because I have a hard time that my inner critic is no longer this projection of myself where it's somebody else. It is very much myself. And I'm very comfortable uh like that when I see her face, it is a version of me. It's not somebody else doing this to me. And I think that was difficult for me, that Ed still had to see. Does that make sense? That he had to
Mhm.
not see him as himself. He had to see him as a projection of himself in order to hear himself. And I think that that's just a really beautiful thing that the show's done, because we're all in different aspects of working through this, right? And it is something we all, even if you have the best parents in the world, I think this is something that humans need to kind of go through in order to progress. And I love that in our conversation and in rewatching the episode, that I'm able to see that Ed's shadow version of himself is that person that's trying to protect him and love him and help him accept himself.
Yeah. No, I think that's
No, it's
really well
good.
said. And I think it's a good point. And I think you bring up an interesting um the difference between parts work and something like shadow work when you're talking specifically about archetypes, because it's similar but it's also very different in some ways when it comes to the integrating those pieces together, or sometimes like you're saying letting them go. And I think that really is the difference, because yeah, when parts work you kind of say like, okay, this person absolutely just sits to the sidelines right now and I don't need them to step forward. Whereas if you're looking at Jungian archetypes, that you're actually, it's the opposite. It's that everyone is present at all times, and I'm using the shadow side is now kind of again fully integrated, where it doesn't have to be shut off to the side and then come on. It's like, no, how can we do this together? And so I do agree with you. I like that moment where ultimately the thing that Ben ends with is "you're welcome," because I think that is what our shadows are trying to do. They're like, I'm trying to help you, but all these ways that they're like really upsetting us. And I do like that point, because I think when you're looking at you have these, archetypes, and then you have like their shadow, like there's a correspondence that happens. And so if you're looking at Ben as being this trickster criminal, that absolutely fits. If you're thinking about Ed as his archetype as this outlaw who's looking for freedom, that's ultimately what the outlaw wants, is freedom. And the criminal is there to kind of take it too far and push it over, again, literally push it over the edge. And so I think again, it's looking at how you can not see that as something that's trying to hurt you, but that ultimately is trying to help you. But it really hurts because it's not fun and it takes years and years and years of work. So yeah, I just loved all your points. And yeah, I think you're right that ultimately Ed doesn't have to do anything to be lovable. He just is lovable. And it's sometimes we all need different things to get to that point of understanding that we are enough just the way we are. And that maybe this was what Ed needed. And I think, as you see, he comes after this moment and then continues to work through it. Like you can have this moment and still be like, okay, well that happened, now what? Like life keeps going on and you still have to figure out how you show up every day and step into that, like, I am enough and this is who I want to be.
Yeah, I was wondering just originally, like, okay, every vision I feel has something to teach us, some lesson. And like, what's the lesson from this vision? And I think I'm going to be watching for it in the coming episodes. Like, because of this, where do we see things play out? Like, he's had this clarity. Now, what's the action?
Yeah, which I
Yeah.
think that makes me think of them Buttons, who sees Ed and he's like, gravy basket, like he knows automatically. Similar to what Katie's saying. She's like, oh well, I've done the work, so then I can recognize when someone's doing the work, or I can recognize when someone's maybe not doing the work. Again, like after you've been through it, you have this wide view of you can't see exactly what's going on. Buttons doesn't know exactly what happened in the gravy basket, but he knows the gravy basket happened, I guess is my point. And I think it's similar to kind of doing a lot of this internal work. Like you may not know exactly what's going on, but you can definitely tell when things are going on.
And it helps us understand Ed, I think, better, because in my life and in the lives of others that I've seen, when they go through those kind of experiences, at first there's some really thick armor that's up. And it can go back whenever you're about, like, if you're had a specific role that you played in your family and you're around your family, all of a sudden people who know you now really well will be like, wait, you're kind of different around your family. Or after you maybe go to a high school reunion, or I've never done that, or something like that, kind of an experience where you have that really like jarring kind of
Mm.
present, this vision where you're getting all kind of mixed up, then I think it's very natural for some serious armor to go up. And we see that, I think, happen initially with Ed, where he's like, "Ka-chung," like, I've got all my steel walls in place, you cannot get through. And because you're very vulnerable, and it takes our brain a lot of effort, I think, to sort that out until we can kind of catch up to our inner selves and our outer selves and reality and present and everyone else and how we interact.
I had one other idea, and that's from Lisa Miller. She wrote The Spiritual Brain and the Spiritual Child. We got to hear her speak recently, and she led us through kind of a guided, selected vision. It felt like a selected vision. And the idea was that this reminded me also like this imagination, like the power of your imagination. I think we take for granted, or I minimalize it and say like, oh, that's a childish thing. But the power of imagination was helpful in this situation. Anyway, you imagine kind of a council table, and you picture the people who are going to be sitting at the table, and you can choose anyone living or dead or whoever. For whatever reason, you get to choose who's at your council, and then you can talk to them and ask them how they feel about you, and you can ask them advice on things. And it was a lovely moment, and she says that we get to go back to that council anytime we want to. We can change it anytime we want to, that that guidance is there for us. And I just thought that was kind of, I'm not sure if Hornigold would show up in Ben's table or in Ed's table if he were to do this in the future, but maybe he would. We've come to this conclusion that he's there to help.
Yeah, and I
But
like
that
what it brings up because Anna said it and you said it, like, all of these things are happening in our brain and in our body and in our mind, right? And like they can all be present at once. My 6-year-old Katie can be there with Joanne Freeman, like the most amazing mentor teacher, can be there with all of us, can be there with a different, a future version of myself. And it's all there to help give you what you need, right? And sometimes you have to ask yourself. I've done that. I don't usually do that willingly, but I've asked that of myself, like, what do you need? And sometimes it's that little girl saying, like, I need a hug. And you have to be there for them and give them what they need. And I think that that's really beautifully depicted in this show. And I think I love that what we're talking about, this is not just something available to fictional characters. This is something available to all of us at all times, right? That we have those people in our heart, we have those different versions of ourselves, that we are there to help ourselves be the most authentic, alive version.
I love that. I love thinking about it, thinking about Ed that way, that this is Ed showing up for himself, and that, this is just what he needs in order to do that.
It tracks with everything we know about him. Yeah, it fits.
Yeah.
And that was part 1 of Our Flag Means Vision. Listen to part 2 for our sacred reading text and our character blessings.